Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending upon where you are in the world. And welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, your moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap, as always, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of it, you will be able to access it online. We'll be sending out an email after the event that will take you to the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So at any time during the presentation, if you have a question for either of our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll take about 15 minutes near the end of the presentation and go over the questions. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is The Release Manager is Dead. Long live the Release Manager. Our speakers today are Eric Minnick, who is IBM Product Management Lead for Continuous Delivery at IBM, and Brian Muskoff, who's Director of Urban Code at HCL Technologies. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, really good to be here.
Awesome, awesome. All right, well, Eric, I know you're kicking things off, so I will just put myself on mute and see you during the Q&A period.
All right. No, we're looking forward to those questions. That's always the best part. But as we get into it, I think, if we're going to make a bold statement like the release manager's in trouble, we should probably talk about who release managers are and what we see them doing. Broadly, the release manager guides changes from development to production. So they're often the ones trying to make things move a little bit quicker, but also have a charter of protecting production and making sure changes to production go as well as they can, helping that along. So that kind of gets into this idea of, well, what does it look like to move from development to production? And if you look at this from a continuous delivery point of view, you see a lot of graphics that look a good bit like this, right? Where, there's some work that's coming into development from business, developers write some code that lives in a source control tool. We build that with a continuous integration solution, store that somewhere safe, some sort of a package repository, and then migrate those new builds through test environments and eventually into production. And that looks pretty simple, but Brian, I know, you've lived the life of being a release manager, and this picture might be a little bit too simple, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it looks nice and clean here, but I think we all know the realities of just what lives in the wild, and at scale, it can get a whole lot messier than this.
Right. And so, I think, you were telling me a little bit about some experiences at kind of the past life of yours working on an insurance property. What did like your release cadence look like there, and the organization around that?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of my kind of going back to my roots about 12 years ago, I was part of a startup called insurance.com. And we started from just about nothing and grew it into the nation's largest auto insurance agency, selling about 1,000 policies a day. And we had about 50 developers. And it's not to the scale of some of our customers here at Urban Code. We've got customers with tens of thousands of developers now, but we had our own challenges. We had about a dozen applications, and we were doing all kinds of cool stuff for 12 years ago, like A/B testing and insights-based customer routing. Releases, they were kind of like crack to this company because we could almost instantaneously see the business results based on the nature of the business. It was a high transaction kind of e-commerce business. And so we'd do all kinds of fun experiments, like move where we're capturing a customer's phone number from early in the interview to late in the interview, and we can in real time see what the business lift was from those types of changes. But the architecture there, even for this smaller company, was such that it was pretty coupled together. So the 10 or 12 applications all kind of had to move at the same time, and so we deployed once a month, and it was kind of a all hands on deck effort to move that all at once. We would basically use a week a month to cut a release candidate, ensure final testing, and then on deployment day, so it was the third or fourth Friday of every month, we would get into a war room, have about half the company or half the developers in this war room, 20, 25 or 30 people probably, and go through a one-note checklist. And 10 or 12 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of focus, at least where we were, in terms of optimizing that process. It was a once a month thing, and more of the focus was on application development and getting the business results through the features. But it really kind of dawned on us when the business said, "Hey, we'd really like to move this to twice a month." And the cost of the once a week or 1 month a week and a full day to just release this thing was just kind of too much to bear on an ongoing basis, twice a month. And so we had to kind of think different about how we were going to do it.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think this idea of, we've got 12 applications, and I bet many of those applications had moving parts within them. So you end up with pieces of applications and applications that make up the solution, and you kind of want to look across all of that and say, all right, what's in our last test environment, what's in staging, and move that forward. And I know you weren't alone in that, right? You mentioned some of our customers now who have 1,000 people on call for a release, and you see the spreadsheets planning the release that have line items in it like order breakfast, get the heat to stay on overnight, kind of those steps in the checklist where it's like, yeah, this is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing to think of the scale of some of the releases that are going on in the world today. With many of our customers, we've got a high-tech company that told us they've got 1,000 people on call or involved to some degree with a quarterly release. And a bank told us they had 1 million development hours into each release. And so there was a lot on the line when they were moving that for the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I showed this kind of graphic to customer 2 days ago, and they said, "Oh, that looks so cute and simple compared to what we've got." Yeah, I think this is the simplified thing, right? Where you've got pieces of applications coming into larger releases, and because all of these things talk to each other and break each other. Right. There was some enterprise architect who drew like APIs between everything, and those APIs were supposed to be stable and dependable, but they're not. Because it all breaks each other, you end up with environments like system integration test or staging or kind of some late test environment where all this stuff comes together and we make sure it all works together. And then if it does, then we can coordinate a release across that. And managing this level of complexity and managing that game day, that's a lot of what a release manager actually ends up doing, right? So we see some different titles around release management out there, but we're talking about the kind of people here who are doing things like looking at release windows. If we're a retailer, maybe we shouldn't do this big thing right before Black Friday. If we're a bank, maybe we don't do this big thing on the 30th when a bunch of people are getting paid and paying their mortgages. And because it's a big thing, we got to plan that game day, right? You had the OneNote spreadsheet, or sorry, that list of activities to do. I think Excel is the thing that we see a whole lot of out there. the 1,000-line Excel spreadsheet of all the activities and who needs to do them. And then making sure that this thing is good to go, right? That we have the approvals in place, we've done the regulatory stuff we need to do, that it's been tested, that all the development teams are saying, yep, we're good to go, and that all the training and such is in place. I don't know, as I go through that, Brian, any other kind of big chunks of work jump out to you that we left off, or does that look like the release manager? All right, no objections.
Yeah,
Brian,
actually
you're
got, I
with us,
got
right?
dropped. Yeah, I got dropped there, but it's a tough job, right?
Yeah.
You know, we hear stories about what I think we've started to term the Monday morning effect, right? Where you may have a weekend release and everybody kind of wipes the sweat off their forehead, say Saturday night or Sunday morning, and tries to make the most of what's left of the weekend, and here everybody comes in Monday morning to pick up the pieces of what was left after something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah, no, it's a big job, and you need very, very organized, dependable kinds of people do this. Generally is what we see. Although, Brian, I don't know if you were doing this at some point, then I'll just give you a hard time.
I see where you're going with that, Eric.
We'll trail off there. But I think what we're seeing in the industry right now is that this is changing a lot, right? We have to do this kind of work, or this work is something we have time to do, when we've got these, quote unquote, classic release cycles, right? Where we might be working on some set of capabilities across the suite of applications for months at a time. We might have a couple of these running in parallel, but this is something that we can put on the calendar, and we know that 6 months from now there's going to be a release in early June, and we don't necessarily know what's in it. We're working on that, but we know that's there. But it's a pretty different game as we start looking at continuous delivery and at the sort of acceleration of release cadence that we're seeing out there in the market. So Brian, I know you're seeing a bunch of teams delivering more frequently, and back to your insurance.com example, this had some profound impacts on how you guys went about things, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think the kind of trendy term right now is the project to product transformation, and I think that's a nice way to look at this transition, and it's certainly occurring. From an insurance.com standpoint, we went through this about 10 years ago. We realized to go from once a month to twice a month releases, we couldn't keep doing the same thing. So it was just too much overhead for the team. And so, when you look at, what are the types of changes you need to make? Well, one of them is just automation, right? You need to make sure that you've got a streamlined process that, isn't real dependent on manual activity to get that done. The other piece is architecture, right? We need to look at how do we decouple these applications in a way that they can be released independently, and you don't need to coordinate those releases. And then from that project to product perspective, how do you change your methodology or way of thinking? Shift from a classic PMO program management type approach to getting into more of those product oriented funding cycles and just kind of ongoing efforts in that manner.
Yeah, and
go ahead. I will say there is a happy ending to that insurance.com story. We were able to make those changes, and releases ultimately ended up becoming a non-event. We went from teams of say 25 to 30 on Fridays to just a couple of folks, and the teams were able to release independently, and really what's just more of an on-demand type model, and that certainly has become much more mainstream over the last few years.
No, I think non-event is exactly the thing that you're shooting for. I was working with an airline, and they did about 10 releases a year, but these were big, meaty things. And after each one, there'd be a party, right? Like not that Monday. Everyone was dead on Monday, but uh, as you got out a couple of days, there'd be cake and ice cream.
No doubt about it. Yeah, pizza and beer for us.
Yeah, no, you guys were cooler. But yeah, you have the party, and I think a success criteria for a lot of organizations should be the party goes away, right? That it becomes so routine and boring that like maybe you do a party if you actually are shipping big new features because it's exciting to launch a new product or something, but not because you survived the release.
Exactly right. Yeah, the party should be, hey, that cool feature or that business idea that we just released, let's see how that's playing out. And if we're getting the lift we thought we would out of it.
Exactly. Now, I think this all sounds good. And, this is what we've been pushing customers towards for many years. Continuous delivery is better. We've got less overhead, etc. But if I'm the release manager and I'm looking at this world where releases are going out 46 times more often, right? That's daily or more than daily. What about all the things I do in my job? Right? I mean, I think we look across that list of activities we talked about a couple of minutes ago, and game day planning, like there's no game day anymore. It's just every day, and you can't have to plan for it anymore. Right? All these activities have to be automated.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, everybody's kind of on their own schedule as far as the transformation, but I think this is exactly where we're going to end up at the end of the day. Is a lot of these activities kind of go away.
Yeah, and I mean we're talking to more and more release managers who are kind of peeking over the horizon at this and not feeling very good about it. Right, or simultaneously they feel great about it because they know how good it is for everything they've been working towards, and then also like, yeah, but where do I fit? And I think it's a scary time. But the good news here, Brian, I think is we think there's a lot of places for people with this skill set to go have a profound impact on their organization and be more valuable, if anything. I think you agree with that.
Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to think that I'm kind of proof of that.
Amen. Yeah. Now, so I think we want to look at each of these in turn, right? We're saying to do this continuous delivery, there's got to be this pipeline construct that quickly moves changes from dev to prod. Own that, or be on the team that owns that, and help bring all the controls in. Brian will talk a little bit about value stream optimization and kind of that whole delivery of value from business concept to working for the customer. How do we improve that and streamline that? Release managers kind of know where the bodies are buried really well there. And then we see a big rise in product management, and that can really suit the release manager persona pretty well too. So let's look at each of these in turn. I'll start here talking about pipelines. So this picture that we had before, right, needs a lot of work in order for it to be created. And release managers can add a ton of value to creating pipelines. Right, this isn't something you want to just give to the junior developer on the team and say, all right, you go make it so we can deploy to production real easy, and I'm sure it'll be fine, right? We need that responsible grown-up element. So part of that is figuring out which elements need to be tested together and released together, right? If these things break each other, they should ship together. Where do we need a pipeline of pipelines? Where's the coordination that we need? Where do we not need coordination? Release managers who tend to oversee those final steps tend to have a pretty good understanding of where those breaking points are. As well, they have a pretty good relationship with the ops people who've seen it catch on fire, the QA people who test it together, and development leaders. Then you got this idea of gates, of quality checks at every stage of the pipeline that provide rules about where you can do releases, where you can't advance something. And so all of the controls that were in place, right, that all the approvals that we needed to get, your auditors still want all of that to happen. It can change the form it happens in, right? It might be, hey, I need 2 people to be involved in every change, and managing a pull request is the second person. But where you have a director of QA must sign off that it's all been tested, this might just be, we need to validate with our test automation tool that all the tests passed, and that the code coverage was sufficiently high that we think it meets that same standard of we have tested the thing. And the same will apply to security checks, performance checks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we saw a presentation from Capital One recently where they listed out the 13 things that they validate as part of their pipeline. There needs to be somebody who kind of knows what those standards are and can do that translation from here's how we used to do it to here's how it could work with automation. Right? We think release managers are really well suited to that kind of perspective. And then matching that, things like permissions, right? Who can push a button to go to prod? Is it everybody? Is it some people? Making sure that's all in place, right? So I think these are some key areas that need to be realized within pipelines for continuous delivery to really work. Release managers, as we see up there in the top left, they understand the controls. They know who the people are. They're good at kind of mapping between the existing way of doing it and the new way. Many release managers aren't as technical to actually do the engineering of this and build it together. Some are. For those who aren't, then you're probably pairing up with that automation engineer, that DevOps engineer to really drive that forward and make that successful. So I guess, Brian, do you have anything you wanted to add to that, or should we look at the role?
I think this is right. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many on the call are thinking, we've got a pipeline. We've been working on pipelines for years, and I agree. That's true. The way that we've started to frame this is we've got what I would consider a day one pipeline. It's got the basic automation, and you've got a flow. But we're not done, right? There's always this kind of ongoing evolution of technologies and other optimizations that we can find. I think about it. One is just scale, right? The scale dimension. How do we take a working pipeline from a team or an org and make it enterprise wide? That's a challenge, in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
You've got new platforms like cloud native applications, containers, and so forth. How do you pull those into the pipeline? You have consistency of tooling and practices and so forth across, say, mainframe and containers and distributed. And there's all kinds of other areas we can go with this, right? Like you mentioned, the gating, the auto progression. Can you have like red, yellow, green lights that automatically promote, past environment based on test results? What level of sophistication can we get with those test results? Lots of fun stuff we can do here moving forward, and I think the release manager is very well suited to help guide in that.
Yeah. All right. I guess with that, let's turn to kind of that next area. Because Brian, you had a tweet a month or two back that caught my attention where you said, hey, we don't have release managers on the team anymore. We've got a value stream manager or something a lot like that. What the heck were you talking about?
I'm glad you asked, Eric. Yeah, so going way back to my bachelor degree, I was an industrial systems engineer. We studied quite a bit in the 90s about the Toyota way, lean practices, and so forth. And they're fairly early days back then. They weren't really even part of the software thinking. But over the last 10 years or so, they've really become pulled into software, and of course the value stream mapping and the concept of value stream management is really a core principle of that lean approach. And as we look at our value stream and our customers' value streams, what we found is the middle of that value stream is fairly well optimized, right? That Agile has done a very nice job of optimizing dev and test. There's still more that we can do, but really it's the early days and the release and operations days that have the most opportunity today. In fact, as we look at the market, the automation Agile is just table stakes, right? Like if you're not doing that, you've got to really look in the mirror and ask yourself why you haven't moved to that. And again, just like that first path, the release manager has the skills and experience that few others have in the organization to be able to look end to end and look for those opportunities for improvement. At times there'll be tools or process changes, but there's no doubt opportunity to optimize this process. And the skill sets that are required are very much in line with the release managers historically done. What are our compliance and governance requirements? What are those best practices in terms of quality and security and so forth that we need in the process? And then, incorporate the lean practices. What are those wastes? I've always liked that acronym Tim Wood from the manufacturing area in terms of those 7 wastes, and they translate right over to the software world as well. And for those of us that have been involved with the kind of the lean movement, we know metrics and visibility into the process are a key part of making this successful. And I think historically release managers have looked at what I would call kind of classic project management type metrics, Gantt chart oriented, weeks and months and schedules and milestones and deadlines. And value stream management is bringing in a different set of metrics: cycle time, lead time. How long does it take to get something from request to production? Efficiency. How much time in the process is spent on actual work versus wait states? How can we reduce those wait states? And then you get into the operational sides of the house. How long, when you have an issue in production, how long does it take to fix it? What types of failure rates are we having with our releases or our code quality? And then ultimately, where we're heading is around predictive analytics, right? How can we forecast based on the change in the code base? What is the probability that there is a defect in this code? Is it such a low probability that we can kind of move forward with the level of testing that's already been completed, or is it high risk and we should double down on that testing? Mm-hmm. And these are all areas that the release manager is very well suited to grow into.
I agree, and I can't help but think of that first good book about DevOps, or the Phoenix Project. They go to a factory and they're up above the shop floor and they're able to look down at it as raw materials and orders are coming in at one end and finished goods are kind of leaving at the other end, and you can kind of see how it's all flowing and see that where it's flowing smoothly and not flowing smoothly. And the challenge that we have in tech is that there's nowhere for that, right? That to look across these sorts of metrics is very often looking across a dozen tools or 24 tools that each have a slice of that data. It's so one of the areas we're investing in is to kind of pull all that together and give that view of the shop floor, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it's a very natural evolution, right? We've got these automation tools, we've got the software tools in place to, automate the process, and they're producing lots of data points. But it's not till lately that we've actually been doing anything with those data points, and they're across many tools, and you've got to find a way to consolidate that. The other challenge, or the way the manufacturing analogy breaks down, is we're not producing the same widget, right? Each one of these features or changes is different, and well, it'd be boring if we were just doing exactly the same thing as manufacturing. So that's certainly a nuance that is a challenge to software.
Yeah. Now, if we're going to do the car analogy, probably the left-hand side of your little graph here speaks to, well, what's the next car we should build? And the right-hand side is let's produce them, but we only produce them one at a time. They're all custom in a way.
Exactly.
We're going to abuse this analogy into the ground. How about instead we talk about kind of product management as a third path. You talked earlier about this transformation going on from IT being managed by, we have a bunch of projects and we fund a project. And usually it's only worth going through the PMO if the project is rather large, to we have products and teams around those products. And I think as we do that, then, well, someone's got to look after those products, and maybe several someones.
Yeah, that's exactly right. These all somewhat kind of fit together, right? So the product manager role is similar to the release management role in terms of it's tough. If you look at this chart here, there's a lot of responsibilities, and product managers are going to have a tough time doing it all. And at the same time, as we streamline this process and are able to release more frequently, and there's less focus on the actual execution of the delivery, we've got to have an eye on the outcomes. Are we getting the business results that we need? And to your point, we have to take a look at this project to product initiative and ask how can we reduce the front and the back of these cycles so that we can move faster. If you can only fund a product once a year, or a project once a year, because that's all your company's funding cycle allows, that's going to be your limiting factor in terms of lead time or cycle time. And so we've got to come up with a different model to fund these teams, and that product-oriented approach is the right one. And for a company like Urban, or a product like Urban Code, it's natural, right? We sell products, so product management's just second nature to us. For a bank or an insurance company or a retailer, they think of them more in terms of applications, right, rather than products. And so it's a much bigger mental shift and process shift to turn that over. And I think there's certainly an opportunity for the release manager to help out the product manager. And some of that just plays into the day-to-day of deployments, right? Rather than having a command center like I referenced in our insurance.com days, we can focus more on, hey, what are we getting the business results that we were seeking with these changes? a good example of that's the feature flag management, right?
Yep.
If you have a release on Monday, let's say you've got 10% of your customer base testing that feature flag, are those results as expected or as hoped? And if so, why don't we start to go from 10% to 20 to 30 and then end up having most of your user base with that new feature? There's that whole kind of feedback loop as part of this DevOps continuous delivery cycle, and many times it gets kind of lost, right? The product manager wears many hats, and keeping an eye on what's going on in production and ensuring those results get fed back into the development cycle are a challenge. And I tried to highlight over on the left there, kind of a heat map of where that release manager can play, and I think there's definitely a sweet spot there.
The outcomes are so interesting because when we work on a release for 6 months, right? Nobody actually wants to look under that rock and see if we advanced the business outcome the way we thought we would. Because what if we didn't? Then we just wasted 6 months. Everybody's depressed and someone's getting fired, right? Like, you just don't want to look. But if you're making changes every couple of days, and if someone said, oh, I think we should, fiddle with where the question about your phone number is, right? If you can do that really quickly, then you can make the quick change, measure it, and if it's like, oh no, it was better where it used to be, all right, you wasted a couple hours over the course of the last week. Cool, like no big deal. And if you moved the business forward by increasing conversion rate by 3%, fantastic. So I think we don't have a discipline around measuring outcomes because no one wanted to look before. Probably not a politically sensitive thing to say, but I think that's true.
Or it's done and we're moving on to the next thing.
Yeah, I guess that didn't work. Well, we'll try the next thing. But now that's going to be done. And I think something that we've seen within some of our kind of more dynamic SaaS properties, as a big software vendor, is you start having product management and like feature areas of a product, right? It's because the amount of kind of measurement, customer engagement, working then with the development team to figure out the right thing to build and seeing that get out the door, all of that happens so much faster and needs so much more attention that you end up needing more and more product managers. So the rate of pace wants more product management, and the shift away from kind of this project orientation and more product orientation wants it. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunity here. And we think that, across a good chunk of this, release managers are better fit than most existing people to kind of step into that role.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a hashtag at the bottom of this slide, continuous consumption. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite customers kind of coined this term, or is trying to coin this term, and I really like it, right? When you start releasing as frequent as, we're starting to see the leaders release, you've got new problems, different problems. And one of those are, can our users keep up? Can trainers keep up? Can documentation keep up? And that's yet another, opportunity for the release manager. How do we find a way to ensure that our user base can consume these new capabilities? The design must be extremely intuitive to make it kind of self-learning and so forth. It's another kind of interesting area to pursue as a release manager.
All right. So in summary, huge transformation for release management. How we're working, how we're achieving our controls, all shifting, right? At the same time, we still want to deliver value quickly. We want that to be efficient. And we want production not to catch on fire when we do a release, right? That we've got to be building that quality in. And it's not just something that each individual development team is likely to be successful with on their own. And so across these areas of kind of driving quality into pipeline, value stream optimization, and product management, we see kind of a lot of these capabilities, right? Kind of finding new homes, and the people doing the work finding new homes as well. So we think that's absolutely critical to the enterprise. This work will continue in new forms, and it's a very exciting time. Now, that said, as we start looking ahead towards Q&A here, Brian, there's some release management that's sticking around.
No doubt.
The example I like to give is around airlines. So if an airline wants to charge for yet another new thing, right? They charged for bags, and maybe they want to charge you for picking a seat, etc. In order to make that live, they're going to need to update the website, the mobile app. If they're going to sell it to you on board, then the point of sales device that the flight attendants are carrying needs it. Probably update the kiosks. The kiosks are annoying to update because people might be using them at any given time, and you have dozens of them scattered around, in each of 200 airports in the world. And right, you're still in this world where at a moment in time, this new capability all needs to be turned on. And, feature flags might be part of the answer in a continuous delivery world where all of those things have been updated weeks or months before go live time. I don't believe that for a major event like that, where if it goes wrong, you're going to be on the nightly news, the airlines are going to be like, hey, we're just going to turn on the feature flag and see if it works, right? They're going to have put all of that stuff into a test lab somewhere, turned on the feature flag in the test lab, and made sure it all worked before. And the actual turning on the flag, they're going to coordinate that very carefully with the business, right? You're still going to have, marketing is going to be involved. There's going to be, approvals from 6 different VPs that all say, yes, at this time, on this date, we can go. And then you're still going to have all hands on deck for when that happens. So I think even when the bits are being moved in this continuous delivery, hyper modern way, there are going to be those larger release events that need more traditional release management. And so there is going to be kind of a remnant there of traditional release management that sticks around. Brian, is that about right? Anything you want to add?
No, there's no doubt about it. As your career kind of develops in technology, you realize, change is definitely happening every day, but it often happens slower than we think. Containers, it's taking 3 or 4 years for those really to become mainstream. I think it's the same type of thing here. It's going to be a kind of steady transition over time. You mentioned earlier that we have moved from release managers at Urban Code to value stream managers. And, when I shared the job description, the updated job description with my release managers, they said, wait a minute, this is my old release management job and new responsibilities. So, well, yeah, you can't move, away from your old stuff until you kind of resolve the issues or the responsibilities of the release manager. And it's going to take some time to fully make that transition.
Yep, absolutely. And I guess while that transition is happening from a product point of view, say we're going to get into Q&A, and the first question is always, so do you sell anything that helps with this? Yep. Urban Code Release is aimed more at that enterprise release manager, traditional release management persona, which is probably still most workloads in a lot of big enterprises, right? So for those releases that are going monthly to yearly, where you've got, lots of people on call, whether it was, Brian's team that had 36 people in the war room, or those customers we alluded to that have 1,000 people on call, like that's the Urban Code Release sweet spot. It can handle that kind of scale and give you telemetry into which sort of development teams are on time for their release and which might be lagging. And then Urban Code Velocity is probably better aimed at that, new job description you're writing, Brian, where, yeah, there's some traditional release management that's still there. But it's optimized around much more frequent releases, right? Faster than monthly. So anywhere from every couple of weeks to a couple times a day. But where you still have to do some level of coordination or testing across interrelated components and services and such. And so this brings together, some lightweight release coordination, so you can schedule these larger events with all those deep metrics that you need to surface in order to understand where are we going fast, where are things inefficient, how do I improve the performance of these application teams, how do I help them out? Is it we haven't automated enough tests, so we're too slow in the QA lab? Is it long wait times and backlogs before development ever picks it up? Is it our deployments fail 10% of the time? Really kind of surface those metrics and help you coach these teams to higher effectiveness. All right, and I think with that, we wanted to leave 10-15 minutes for Q&A. So on behalf of Brian, I'll thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your questions.
We have a lot of them that have come in so far. Yeah, so let's go ahead and dive right in. But before we do, if you guys have a question for either Eric or Brian, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. The first question is, when a feature requires changes to multiple microservices, who keeps track of when all the individual changes are done so you can turn on the feature flag?
Good question. So I think that was the release manager is kind of what you were alluding to there, Brian, is that there's still in the kind of product management persona of the release manager, like that could be a release manager. We also see, I think sometimes like a tech lead on the team taking on a third of my job is release management, tracking this sort of stuff. That's kind of the two ways I've seen it going.
Yeah, I've also seen called a business analyst, say a delegate from a product management organization, be responsible for kind of that low-level feature flag switches. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly an important responsibility, and it's not just the activity of turning it on, it's measuring those results and turning it up if we need to. That also ties into your business intelligence, your analytics, and getting that feedback loop in place. At the end of the day, I think it's well suited for a release manager to, if nothing else, ensure that is coordinated and handled, but maybe ultimately own it.
Okay, great. Next question. With frequent releases, does release naming and packaging still have a place? Another great question, I'm sure.
I think yes to packaging and no to naming, or at least the naming is half automated. I don't know, Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it always makes sense to have some kind of unique identifier to a release or a package or a version. And so, yeah, we've called them build lives or some kind of versioning number. But yeah, no, I think absolutely it makes sense to index those in some way.
Okay. All right, great. The next question, what are your perspectives on the needed frequency of technical releases, such as upgrades, patch releases, migration, significant maintenance, etc.?
From my perspective, we shouldn't kind of think of those as an independent activity from the rest of kind of our functional development. And so when we plan releases, it should be part of it. And I would say, should release as frequently as the business and the process can handle. And so if those, technical requirements, that technical debt can be addressed on a regular basis, let's keep it on that quick cadence.
All right, great. So then moving rapidly along, since we have so many questions here, what are the top three industry standard metrics in use to show a high-level picture of release health? In other words, the top three metrics that can be shown to upper management.
So the state of DevOps guys, Dora, would say that, and I agree with them, that it's deployment frequency, how often we go to production. That's number one. Number two is lead time. Right now, that's typically measured from how long does it take a code commit to get to production. If you could measure also how long does it take an idea to get into your backlog and then to production, that's highly valuable too. And then the third one is mean time to recovery. When something breaks, how long does it take you to fix it? The fourth one that kind of shows up in the research off and on is frequency of deployment failure. But it turns out the first three predict the fourth one, so you don't actually need it.
Makes total sense there. Okay.
Also, how much money are you making? I would measure that too.
I think that's always an important one, regardless of what you're measuring. All right, and speaking of making money, the next question here, from a career path perspective, do you think that the title of release manager is on the decline? Already on the engineering side in continuous delivery environments, DevOps engineers are more sought after now and better paid on average than release engineers. So do you see a similar trend on the management side where people in the role of a contemporary release manager will be called something else? And if so, what new titles are we likely to see on job listings and people's resumes for these positions?
Yeah, that's something that we're already trying to get in front of with the value stream manager title. That is something that's already occurred in manufacturing. In fact, in manufacturing, a value stream manager is a very senior, almost general manager type in some cases, owning P&Ls and so forth. Not sure if it will evolve to that degree in the software world, but kind of.
Oh, we lose Brian there for a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those three areas, like value stream manager, product manager, good fits, and then if you're owning the pipeline, you can put DevOps in the title somewhere. It might be DevOps release manager, DevOps release coordinator, something like that. You can DevOps your job if you're doing some of it legitimately. Okay.
All right, great. So let's see. I think we have time for one or maybe two more questions. Let's see. Okay. All right. So you didn't really talk about products tooling until the end, but how do you justify moving to some type of ARA solution when your DevOps groups feel that all their CI/CD tools are sufficient for handling all of the builds and deployments? And what would you consider the key justifications?
Excellent question. That's one I should have put in there first.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, right, if the reality is this simple. If the application teams have very successfully decoupled every microservice from one another, right? And they can push them live without ever doing any integration test with anything else. They've probably earned the right to do, any number of open source tools as long as they're building these gates in. Good job, right? If your reality is this thing, then you've got a bit of a mess, because what your development teams have done is they've implemented each of these little lines independently. And that feels really good for them as they're doing the left-hand side of each one, right? Coding it up and deploying into the test lab, like that's all great. And then the same automation that deploys to the test lab for a microservice will deploy to production as well. And so they might say, we're done. But if you've got this problem, then you need something to make it better. And so what we're hearing a lot more is customers who have had teams implement a lot of these independent CI/CD pipelines, coming and saying, I have a release management problem. And very often a release management problem they would not have had they implemented an application release automation tool like our Urban Code Deploy. But now they've got it kind of like half automated and it's a mess. And that is somewhere, whereas we talk about Urban Code Velocity, we'll create this pipeline of pipelines on top of, it says Jenkins in there, I don't know if you can read it, but on top of a simpler pipeline like a Jenkins, so that you can say, hey, these 8 Jenkins pipelines are actually interrelated, and I'm going to want to be able to see in any given environment which Jenkins build is in each environment. And that tends to be the way to reconcile this, that doesn't require going to all these teams and saying, you got to throw out all that stuff that you built and you're really proud of because you spent way too much time building it. This says, okay, no, that's good, but we have a quote unquote release management problem now. Let me put something on top that helps it out. By the way, I'm going to give you all sorts of shiny metrics and visibility across it. So hopefully that makes sense. That's what we're seeing. It's a bit of a messy time in the market.
Yeah. Okay. All right, great. Well, we're about 2.5 minutes to the top of the hour, so that's going to be all the time that we have for question and answer. Want to alert you guys that if we did not get to your question, please know that Eric and Brian and the folks who are working behind them will be getting a copy of all the questions that came in. So I'm sure somebody from their organizations will be more than happy to follow up with you offline. Also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or you just want to listen to it again, you will be able to do so. We're going to be sending out an email post-event sometime this afternoon that will include a link to the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go there, check it out, just look under the webinars tab, and it will be right there waiting for you in the on-demand section. And while you're there, just go ahead and take a look around. Maybe we've got lots of other webinars in the on-demand and upcoming sections. So hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 that pique your interest as well. And with that, I would like to thank Eric Minnick and Brian Muskoff. What a great presentation. You guys, thanks so much for dealing such a great presentation today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, a lot of fun. And if people want to tweet their questions at us too, then we can have the conversation in public. It'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, the only thing left to say is this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.